Welcome to the All Around Joe podcast, where we optimize your human performance from my personal experience as an athlete, coach, and all-around self-improvement junkie. On this edition of the All Around Joe podcast, I am excited to be interviewing Danny Holzman of Halo Neurosciences. Now, just so you have an idea of what Halo Neurosciences is they're the company that makes that headset thing that you see athletes wearing during the warm-ups or even during their workouts, right? And I've had the privilege of getting to use one of these Halo Sports, is what they're called, Halo Sport, for maybe about the last month now. It's been a little bit inconsistent because of my travel schedule as to when I've been using it, but probably about 3 times a week. And I've been using it in a way that would be ideal for improving the things that I am working on right now. So some of those things are front squats, overhead squats. I'm always doing snatches and clean and jerks. So I'm excited to talk with Danny about how the product actually works and how it can help everybody improve. Because I've actually started seeing improvements in my own training. So I want to understand why that's working and help you to understand if Halo Sport is right for you and if you should pick one up yourself. On that particular note, if you do decide that you would like to get yourself a Halo Sport, you can get one with a sweet $250 discount by using the code AllAroundJoe. So I've liked it enough that I've decided to put, my All Around Joe brand behind it and get you guys a discount if you use the code AllAroundJoe. So without further ado, let's hop right into this interview with Danny Holzman of Halo Neurosciences. I hope you enjoy. Hey, Danny, how's it going today?
Good. Thanks for having me, Joe.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you on the podcast here. I know that I've been interested with the Halo products for a long time, and I'm excited to dive into it with you. But before we even get into the product, man, I want to know about you a little bit. Like, what's your story? What's your background?
Yeah. So I grew up in Chicago suburbs. Was always fascinated in science all throughout school. It wasn't until I got to Cal Berkeley for college where I really fell in love with studying the brain pretty early into my college career. And as I kind of, went through college, I got more and more fascinated with specifically ways in which we can help the brain function better.
Nice.
So I joined the Halo team 3 years ago on the research team. So when I joined, Halo was very much, a research lab, testing brain stimulation. And then once we actually developed a product for the world to see, I have transitioned to more the partnership side. So I get to work with the elite level athletes and organizations and teams and military and help them get the most out of the product.
Very cool. And you an athlete, or like, how did that connect with the brain science? Like, what made you so interested in it?
Yeah, always a huge fan of sports. Still play a lot of sports myself. I never, played at the professional or collegiate level, but yeah, always been a huge fan and a very, active person myself.
Okay. Very cool. And so what is Halo Neuroscience first? Even before the product, like, what is Halo Neuroscience?
Yes. So Halo is broadly speaking, is a neurostimulation company.
Okay.
So I guess I'll give you a little bit of background on the company. It was founded in 2013 by Dr. Daniel Chow and Brett Wingeier. And this is actually their second neurostimulation company.
Okay.
So their first is called NeuroPace, and it's a pretty heavy-duty medical device. So it requires brain surgery and implanting an electrode into the brain of epileptic patients.
Okay.
And what it can do is actually detect and stop a seizure from happening.
Wow.
So yeah, incredibly powerful stuff. And for them, they really saw like how powerful brain stimulation can really be.
Yeah.
The problem being the whole invasive part of it, that it required brain surgery, it required implanting this electrode into a brain, which, most people don't want to do, and all of the healthy population isn't going to do.
Right.
So that was really like the goal in mind with starting Halo Neuroscience, is how can we bring the powers of brain stimulation to the entire world, to healthy and impaired. So in 2013, they started this company specifically around non-invasive brain stimulation.
Yeah.
And again, was very much a research lab at the start. So no product in mind, just testing this technology and seeing where the benefits could be.
Mhm.
And it wasn't until we saw very, very strong results in helping people acquire movements that we developed the product, Halo Sport, the one that you see today.
Okay, so there wasn't, you guys didn't necessarily know, or Halo Neuroscience didn't necessarily know what they were going to be doing with it, the technology necessarily.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that's pretty different from most companies. That this company was actually founded without a product in mind.
Yeah.
You asked Dan and Brett when they started this company, and I think there's no way they would have said that we would have been in the world of athletics. So yeah, it kind of just turned out that way based on the data that we were seeing in research.
Okay, and then like, how did that tipping point happen where it was like, all right, this could be really cool for being able to shoot a basketball better or whatnot, and then let's test that.
Yeah, so looking back on like the research we were doing was much more like in the weeds kind of scientific research.
Yeah.
Looking at muscle activity and things as simple as improving someone's pinch strength.
Sure.
But for us, we were like, okay, what we're doing is helping people learn movements faster. Who are the people that care about movement the most? And that's really the people that we created a product for. The athletes of the world, military personnel, musicians, again, everyone who's going to care about improving movement.
Sure. And did the founders have a passion for that? And is like, I'm still trying to like figure out how that really connected in. Was just like, hey, this could be, what are we going to do with this research? And it goes to sport or, movement, or we really like this and it would be cool to have a product that makes us better at what we're doing,
Yeah, they're both definitely enthusiastic about sports themselves. So both Dan and Brett are like big time cyclists. So yeah, I don't think it's totally a coincidence that that's the route that it went at first. But again, more than anything, it was just we were seeing like very strong and reliable data with stimulating the part of the brain that's responsible for movement.
Mm-hmm.
So it made sense for the place to start. It was, we keep seeing good results. So why not create a product around that?
Yeah, absolutely. And that leads us into like, what is the product? Tell me about that.
Yeah. So, Halo Sport looks like a pair of headphones. It is a pair of headphones. It kind of looks like Beats by Dre would look.
Sure.
Really, the reason for that is because we need to get electrodes to the top of the head, because the part of the brain that we're stimulating, motor cortex. The motor cortex is the strip of the brain that's going to go right in between your ears, right at the top of your head. And it's the part of your brain that controls your movement. So it's the part that is responsible for both learning movement as well as executing movement, and sends signals down through your spinal cord. Spinal cord then sends signals to your muscles and tells your body how to move.
Okay.
So yeah, people see the headphones. They often ask like, why the headphones? And honestly, it's because it's the best vehicle to get electrodes right on the top of your head here.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And a little bit further, like, what would happen if somebody had a dysfunctional motor cortex, or like, what is the motor cortex a little bit more, and like, how does that actually stimulate? Let's get into the science of it a little bit, if you're cool with that.
Yeah, no, definitely. So yeah, so again, the motor cortex is like a pretty physical part of your brain. People think the brain, and they often think about like focus and attention and like getting pumped up and in the zone.
Yeah.
The motor cortex actually has very little to do with that. It's much more about building circuitry that's going to teach your body how to move.
Okay.
Everything from a very complex movement to something as simple as just, gripping your hand. Everything having to do with your muscles starts with the motor cortex sending signals down. So to get into the science of what Halo is actually doing, so the technology that we employ is called transcranial direct current stimulation. Mm-hmm. TDCS for short, because it's a mouthful.
Okay.
And that's been a research tool for quite some time. For about 20 years or so, it's been really picking up in the research world. Uh-huh. And what it does is it's basically just sending a small amount of electric current, direct electric current, to the brain. So it is a very small amount of electric current, but enough that can actually get past the skin and past the skull. Okay. And place an electric field over the part of the brain that you're trying to improve.
All right.
Which is what's really cool about using stimulation, is it can be very specific on the type of behavior, the type of perception, the type of movement that we're trying to control.
Sure. And so like, why does electrical stimulation on that part of the brain actually make my motor cortex work better?
Yeah. So, your brain is electric itself. It's the language of the brain. It's how the brain communicates and builds connections. It's through electricity, which means it's also quite sensitive to electricity. So a small electric field actually allows neurons to fire more easily.
Okay.
Basically, it's exciting the neurons of the part of the brain that you're stimulating. And then what that's able to do is allow neurons to then build circuitry with each other more easily. And that is the whole process of learning.
Okay. And is there like a specific signal rate or something that's going on there? I know I'm saying this wrong, but or could we just take some electrical charge and just put it on our head and it would stimulate? You know what I mean?
Yeah. So it is a specific current. So
Okay.
it's on the upper end of what Halo Sport's going to output. It's slightly over 2 milliamps of electricity,
Okay.
which probably doesn't mean that much to people, but it is a very small amount, but has been found to be like a very safe and very effective amount to actually get to the brain.
Okay, cool. And
Yeah.
as I'm reading through this, and I've been using the product myself, obviously, and I'm a huge nerd as it comes to like technology and trying to improve and get the most out of my training. And so I'm, hanging out at the gym wearing the product and having other athletes ask me, what's it doing? And I'm like, well, they say that it creates this hyperplasticity.
Yeah.
And they're like, plastic. And I'm like, yeah.
Right.
So what is hyperplasticity exactly?
Yeah. So I'll back up a little bit and first just talk about neuroplasticity.
Okay.
So this has been a topic that it's pretty hot right now. It's I think people often talk about this idea that your brain is plastic, and it's basically what it means is that your brain has this awesome ability to change and adapt and to learn new things based on its experiences in the world.
Okay.
Right. So this is the basis of learning anything, from learning a math formula to learning a foreign language to learning movements. This is all because your brain has this ability to change and adapt.
Okay.
So every time that we're training, we're always doing that to teach our brain the movements that we want to learn. Mm-hmm. Hyperplasticity is a state that's going to be this heightened level of ability to change and adapt. So that's really what Halo is doing. It's allowing neurons to fire more easily, which means that the circuitry that the brain needs to build can actually build easier and at a faster rate.
Okay. And I don't know if you know the answer to this, but like what is actually happening when the brain is like changing itself? Is it just that it's making more interesting connections? Is there actually tissue being built in the brain? What's going on in there? Do you know?
Yeah. So, this can get pretty complicated, but when, so I guess there's two parts to it. One is building new connections.
Okay.
So I guess this is a metaphor I like to use. It definitely simplifies things a little bit, but let's say that you're learning a new movement. So one I like to always think of is like riding a bike, because everyone can think back to that moment of riding a bike. And that movement felt so impossible at first. And the reason for that is because there was no connection between the neurons that needed a connection.
Okay.
And so basically the way to think of it is that there's basically a forest in between these two neurons. Okay. And in order to learn the movement, we need to create some sort of path between those neurons. So as we continue to practice that skill, continue to practice riding the bike, we start to build this connection between those neurons. Yeah. Until all of a sudden it clicks, and that's when there's that connection that's being built. And as we get better and better at it, that connection gets stronger and stronger. Okay. So it's a very roundabout way of kind of explaining this idea of learning and plasticity. But what's actually happening is what's called, it's at the synapse of the neurons. Okay. So neurons talk to each other by sending signals through a synapse, which is basically just a little gap between neurons. Mm-hmm. And so the actual process of learning all happens through this synapse, is that one neuron is sending signals to the other neuron, and that neuron needs to then be able to recognize that signal and then do its own thing. Cool.
I'm jumping back into my kinesiology degree days here with all of these terms. It's awesome. I love it. Let's step into like how the product is actually used. So like, let's say you walk into the gym. A lot of my listeners are CrossFit athletes or triathletes or something like that. What do they do?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So a neurostimulation session, or we call it a neuropriming session, is just for 20 minutes long. Okay. So how most athletes will use this as a warm-up tool. They'll use it for 20 minutes right before their training session. So maybe they're stretching, they're doing some light agilities, they're, using a foam roller or something like that.
Yeah.
And the key is that 20 minutes is going to put your brain in this hyperplastic state for a 1 hour window afterwards.
Okay.
So after the 20-minute session, you can take the headset off and your brain's going to stay in this state for 1 hour after. So that's really the key, is that we need to take advantage of that hour window and really feed our brain quality repetitions right afterwards.
Okay, so quality repetitions, that gets me into a couple of things. So first, you don't necessarily have to have the headset on when you're doing the important stuff. It's
exactly
essentially turning it on so that you can take off the headset and then, do the muscle up practice or do the snatch practice or do the Metcon even, right?
Exactly, yeah, which is great because a lot of movements are uncomfortable to be wearing a headset during.
Sure.
Some are impossible. We work with swimmers who can't go in the pool with the headset on, but yeah, as long as you're wearing it right before your training session, you're still going to get the effects during.
Okay, and is there any benefit to, like, let's say if you have your day starts off and you're doing a whole bunch of snatches or muscle ups or complicated movements, and it's going to be, let's say you do it for an hour and you start off with, ramping up your training with the headset on, and then as the 20 minutes pass, you take it off. And is there any benefit to actually having that on as you're starting to move? Or should it be like, oh, I'm walking in the gym, I'm going to take it really easy as I'm doing that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So your brain does get into the hyperplastic state relatively quickly, about 3 minutes into the stimulation session.
Okay.
So it's not that important to be doing movements. Again, the key is just that you want to be able to get right into training right when the 20 minutes is up. So if you have a normal kind of warm-up routine, that's perfect to be doing while wearing the headset. So that way you don't have to do your warm-up routine when you take the headset off.
Sure.
But yeah, again, most of the athletes I work with are doing more of their warm-up routine and not really working too much on the repetitions they're really focused on for the day.
Okay, cool. And then it brings me to the second part of the question that I was thinking of is how clean does the movement have to be in order for this to work properly? I mean, you gave the picture for us of like creating the trail through the trees. What happens if my movement is crap? Then does it create the wrong path through the trees, a really long one? Right.
No, it's a great question. It's absolutely right. Like what we're doing is not magic. We're not just magically making these movements better. All we're doing is allowing your brain to learn the repetitions faster, which means it's even more important that the repetitions you're doing are quality repetitions.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, people need to keep that in mind and really make sure that when they're using Halo Sport, they're going to be really focused during that training session and really thoughtful about their movements.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. So that means that, really gotta be careful with that as well. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the way I think about it too, though, is, that's true about training anyways. If you go into training and you're practicing something incorrectly, you're going to be learning that incorrectly. So no one should be doing that anyways. Sure. But you are right that we're just accelerating the rate at which you learn these movements. And so if you're not thoughtful about them, we're ingraining improper movement as well.
Awesome. Yeah. So essentially get really good coaching, then apply the technology, and then that should hopefully move you in the right direction.
Exactly.
Yeah. Cool. What kind of results are CrossFit athletes seeing with this that you can share? Yeah,
I think, so for me, CrossFit's such a cool sport to be involved in, just because it requires, being a full athlete, right? Which means strength and explosiveness and endurance and flexibility. And it just across the board, it's everything that has to do with an athlete. And what's cool about that is Halo can help just about all of those aspects of an athlete.
Cool.
So it really does depend a lot on what the person is trying to improve.
Okay.
I think I always go to the strength gain just because you can put them into a number and it's very easy to track.
Yeah.
But we've seen, incredible results in improving people's strength and power, really across the board, whether that's like through squats or through snatch, whatever it might be. Our athletes have been, they claim that they've been PRing at a much faster rate than they've been expecting.
Cool. And let's say, for example, that I'm good at strength, but like my endurance component or my quote unquote Metcon, as we call it in CrossFit,
Mm-hmm.
isn't as good. So I'm still going to do my strength component, but it might be over, that's the first 30 minutes. And then I'm going to set myself up for, actually, let's call the strength an hour, just so that it elongates it a little bit. But then I'm going to be doing a 30-minute Metcon after that. And that's the point the component that I really want to improve upon,
Mm-hmm.
because, maybe my endurance sucks, or, just something about it, I'm not as good in that component of CrossFit. Would you then recommend that I waited to do the Halo work before the Metcon?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, so we work with a ton of athletes who are doing just that, right? That their day is not simply one strength session. And so that's right. So the only limitation is you can use Halo once a day.
Okay.
So you have to figure out at which part of the day are you really focused on improving most.
Interesting.
And so, yeah, I mean, what you just said is exactly how people are using it, is they are thinking about what they really want to improve. Maybe it's what they're weakest at right now. They really need to get over this hump, and they're figuring out when to incorporate it into their day that way.
Interesting. Okay. And then I guess the next question is that when you're looking at the app and you're setting up what you're going to do for the day, it says, refresh my memory, there's like legs and arms, and then there's some more hands and fingers.
Yeah,
Is that what it
so
is?
yeah, the consumer app is broken up into, there's three different options. There's a hands and fingers option, and then there's more of a full body. We call it the legs, core, and arms session. And yeah, I guess to explain this a little bit more, your motor cortex is broken up, is basically a map of your body. So depending on where we send the stimulation, we can improve different areas of training. So, for most athletes, they'll use the legs, core, and arm session, which means we're sending stimulation right to the very center of your brain. For the hands and fingers option, that's used mostly by musicians. Some athletes that are really working on grip strength, or, maybe a pitcher working on like specific finger movements to hold a ball.
Okay.
But we're just changing the location of the stimulation. So the hands and fingers area of the brain is going to be, more near your ear. So we can change the stimulation. Okay.
Yeah. And so you said that you should only be using it once a day. And I was watching some videos as I was doing research for talking with you. And there was a guy in there that did he was doing some strength training, but then he also said he used it for like using his keyboard. And I know a lot of people that are still, hunting and pecking or whatever they call it. And I'm like, man, that would be cool if I could type faster. Then I could put it on there, but I'd have to prioritize that on a day that I wasn't necessarily going to do my workout, because that would be the priority.
Right. Yeah. And we say wait like 8 hours. The app will actually give you a soft lockout, and will tell you to wait for 8 hours in between stimulation sessions.
Interesting.
And the reason really just being you get diminishing returns. So, similar to why you wouldn't lift weights three times in a day, it's just because you're not going to get much out of it in that second and third session. Yeah. It's similar idea here, is that stimulating your brain within that 8 hour window actually won't alter, it won't modulate the neuron activity.
Okay, cool. And jumping into some thought that came up is that how long has the research been going on? And I know that obviously some people are going to ask, well, is there anything that I should be worried about as far as safety of the unit goes? So can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah. So I know I mentioned this quickly earlier, but TDCS has been studied, pretty robustly now for a little over 20 years.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean, I guess I'll first answer the kind of research that's being done.
Sure.
And yeah, you can look back like 20 years when the research really started to pick up. And also really like high, quality research being done too. So the U.S. military was very early on to testing this and improving sniper training and pilot training. So yeah, the research that's being done is kind of all over the board. It's definitely improving, the motor stuff that I think Halo is doing a really good job at driving, but also testing things about, improving cognition and helping more general aspects of learning and memory. And that just means stimulating different parts of the brain. So there's a whole bunch of research, a bunch of really awesome results. The other side of it is on the medical space. So TDCS actually initially was developed to treat depression and mood disorders, as well as improve things like, stroke rehab and helping people relearn how to move after some drastic injuries. So that's where a lot of the research is heading right now. I think that's where, Halo is definitely hoping to go as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that also kind of leads into the safety stuff. So this has been, tested on thousands and thousands of subjects at this point, with no safety concerns.
Okay.
More conceptually speaking, your brain, as I mentioned before, is an electric organ itself.
Yeah.
The amount of electricity that Halo is delivering to the brain is tiny compared to what it produces on its own. So there's no reason to think that it would be harmful in any way.
Okay.
And the results would agree with that.
Okay. Cool. And so you mentioned that you would use it once a day, pretty much an 8-hour period. I know that a lot of things that we do, including like when we stimulate the body to gain strength and things like that, we go on and off cycles of it. Is there such a thing with this type of stimulation where you're like, man, it works the best if you're always doing it, or if you're doing it like 3 months on, 1 month off, or is there any kind of research that shows that kind of data?
Yeah, so I can't really point to research that's showing that, but that is exactly what I recommend people to do is phase this in and out of training like you would normally phase your training. So if you're really ramping up and really pushing on strength gains, perfect time to be using Halo. Mm-hmm. If it's more about, recovery and resting in this cycle, then you're not going to get so much out of Halo. So it's okay to take it off. Okay. I think what most CrossFit athletes find is that there's always something that they're working on. So if they're not pushing their strength gains, then they're working on, something on the gymnastics side or something on the endurance side. Yep. So I feel like that's a group that is pretty much always using Halo, just because even when they back off on one side, there's this other area they can be working on.
Okay. And would that work for, or would it be more advantageous to take the, 3 months on, 1 month off, or whatever your cycle is, if you're switching up what you're doing, right? Like you said, with the CrossFitter, it could be like, yeah, I want to spend 3 months or even, 2 months or whatever, focusing on improving my back squat and deadlift, like my overall pulling strength or whatever it may be. And then I'm going to switch into more Metcon stimulation or gymnastics. Would that change in the style of training actually do for kind of the off period? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So I think what you're kind of getting at here is like, does your brain get used to stimulation and get like, do you require
exactly
stimulation to keep up? And that's not actually the case. Your brain is sensitive to the stimulation. Okay. So in that sense, then no, there's no reason to take off for 3 months.
Okay. Gotcha.
Yeah, I guess what I was saying before is more so like if you're really not working on pushing gains, if there's more about, recovering before a competition, not so much of a reason to use Halo there. You're not really working on learning new things, not really working on pushing strength gains, then take the time off there.
Okay. Yeah. Got it. Very cool. Well, that's cool then that you can continue to stimulate your brain. It just stays sensitive to that. Gotcha. Yeah. What do you have any athletes that are in CrossFit that are big names that have had cool results with this and that are thinking that this is technology that everybody should be using?
Yeah. So Carrie Pierce, Camille LeBlanc, Sam Dancer, Kristen Holta are some of our, the bigger athletes that are using Halo. Mm-hmm. I think they would all like swear by the results that they've seen, kind of across the board. So, I think we've been talking about this a lot, but one of my favorite use cases is like what Kristen does. And this is more just about like how she goes about training in general, but she'll look at what she is weakest at in the moment and make it a point to make that a strength of hers. Okay. So the example that she gives me is like, she really struggled with muscle ups. Mm-hmm. So then for her, she was like, I need to make muscle ups one of my strengths. That's just kind of how she goes about training, which is a perfect use case for Halo, right? Find what you're stuck on. You just can't figure out a movement somehow. Yeah. And let's teach the brain to learn that movement faster.
Right. Very cool. Very cool. Let's see. I've noticed that when I'm using it, and I actually just thought of this, does the amplitude matter?
Very slightly. So the app, as you've probably noticed, there's a range from a 1 to a 10 in amplitude.
Yeah.
What that actually is about like 1 milliamp to 2 milliamps of electric current.
Okay.
That whole range is functional. we give people the choice of where they want to put it, more so for comfort, because it does feel different at different levels. The higher you go, the slightly more you get out of it, but it's not very drastic. That whole range is functional.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah. Cause I've been, so people know when you get up and you start the 20 minutes, it puts it on 5, right? Is the default setting.
Yep.
And I don't know. I'm like, well, it's cool if I can feel it more. So I always jack up the amplitude because, even if I can feel something, then maybe I'm convincing my brain that it's working more. So getting more placebo
we hear
effect.
it all the time. Yeah. It's like people want to feel something. And it's part of the reason they do, I would say 80% of our athletes ramp it up to a 10. I hear that all the time.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. So yeah, not so weird then, I guess.
Yeah.
Do you have we've got these top athletes that we've talked about that are awesome, that are using it. I've been using it. I've seen some strength gains in the first few weeks that I've been using it. I think I came across in my research that it said like you might see more or less depending on how trained you are. Is there any truth to that?
Yeah, definitely. So, especially looking at like how, we often get the question, like how often do I have to use this until I see a result? And that's going to depend a lot on the level of expertise. So we've actually seen improvements in a single session with more of the average Joe.
Sure.
If you're an elite athlete, you just have less room to grow. You're already closer to your athletic potential. So it's going to take a little bit longer until you really notice a difference or see a difference. So for elite level athletes, we would say give it about 2 weeks time until we would be confident that you would notice a difference.
Okay. And let's say, for example, you say 2 weeks time and they're trying to improve their muscle up. Like let's say Kristen there is trying to improve her muscle up. Do you recommend like, hey, do this 3 times a week for that muscle up for 2 weeks? Or, because sometimes in CrossFit, you might see a muscle up in your training program, maybe once a week, maybe less. But if you're really trying to improve that, have you seen any kind of repetition that
Definitely
should happen?
So that's the key really, is like repetition based training is the key to what we can improve.
Yeah.
So I would say that is important. If you're really focused on improving a specific exercise, you should make it a point to practice that exercise, pretty often. That's more for like, specific movements. If we're talking about like, let's improve our lower body strength as like a broad statement, I think it changes a little bit, and then we can use it, in really any type of session that we're going about that's going to be working on lower body strength. But yeah, no, I think you're right. Like the key is repetition. So you should make it a point to really do that repetition over and over.
Okay, cool. And do you guys have any kind of like tests that you've told people to do? I know that this is, it's not necessarily a cheap product, but it's something that can work and people want to see that it works, and I know that like when I've done certain things before, certain testing with even supplements, they'll be like, all right, I want you to do 500-meter row. And then I want you to, practice this the X amount of times. And then this is where we're going to see the results. So if you had somebody that's like super skeptical, what would you tell them to test, and how would you set that up?
Right. So this is, I guess like to back up a little, like what we do in our research lab is like very rigorous science, right? Like we'll take large groups of people, give half of them the placebo stimulation, half of them the real stimulation, and look at improvements over 2 to 3 weeks time. And that's how we really prove out that what we're doing is working. But you're absolutely right. The challenge when we get to the real world is that people want to see these improvements, and it becomes sometimes challenging when we're talking about a quote unquote study with one person.
Sure.
Like an N=1 study. So how do we really see improvements that are more than the improvements that we'd expect to see anyways?
Yep.
So I think the biggest things that I always recommend is number one is just have a baseline. Know where you are before you start using a product like Halo. And 2 is like look at some historical data on yourself. See how much you've improved over the last 3 weeks, or maybe if you're more of an elite athlete, you can look like a year ago from today when I was in a very similar cycle, how much was I improving?
Sure.
And then changing nothing except for adding Halo to your routine, what am I now improving?
Right.
So what we're really looking for is like acceleration in learning movement or strength.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so we definitely ask people to, look back on their progress over time and compare their current progress to that.
Okay. And is there any kind of like, I know that training is a lot of your mindset going into the training. Does the stimulation of the motor cortex have anything, is there anything else going on there? Like what are the, does that make sense?
Yeah. Not so much. So I'll be honest and say that we'll hear all the time that people feel focused and more alert and, more attentive to what they're doing.
Yeah.
Maybe there is something there. We don't really think so because, again, the motor cortex isn't really the part of the brain that's going to be responsible for that kind of thought.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, whether that's something really there, or whether it's, some placebo effect there. I think what is real is that, especially with our more elite level athletes, they have a very, very good sense of their body. Their career has been built around their body. So they have a very good sense of where they're at.
Yeah.
So we'll hear things from them and as soon as one session saying that it felt different. They felt like they had more control over their muscles.
Sure.
They felt like they were getting through their warm up more quickly. And what I believe is like, it's that kind of stuff that then people associate with like more focus and more attentiveness when it's really more so of this physical effect that we're having.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I find that like, even if it's placebo, I'm watching people that have gotten results with the Halo sport and I'm thinking, all right, I should be getting results as well. So now that I'm getting this placebo effect, or even like I'm stimulating my own, intensity for that because of what I've seen other people do. So if the science is there that it's actually working, and then I'm convincing myself that it should be working, and then you go into a workout, then it ends up working. And like an example of that is yesterday I PR'd my front squat, and I've been training for a long time, so that doesn't happen very often. And I believe that, I had worn the Halo in my warm up, and part of it was that I did think, oh, well, I'm using this, so I should be getting better. And then I went into it expecting to be better. And, basically it helps the planets align a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, no doubt that placebo effect is working in our favor. But again, that's the exact stuff that we're controlling for in our own studies. So
Sure.
All of the studies that we run, again, we give half the population something that's called sham stimulation. So it tickles the head similar to what TDCS feels like.
Oh, cool.
But it doesn't actually send enough stimulation to get through the skull. So those people think they're getting the real thing.
Yep.
So in a similar way that you just said, they kind of pump themselves up. They're expecting these improvements, but that's exactly what we're controlling for.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Well, very cool stuff, Danny. Is there anything else that we haven't really talked about that you talk about with, athletes or whatever on a regular basis that you think that we miss that we should bring up?
Not so much. I think the way that I like to frame, largely speaking, what Halo is doing is just addressing building an athlete through the neurological perspective.
Mm-hmm.
So when we think about everything that an athlete does, they're eating correctly, they're sleeping right, they're thinking about their muscles, there's the psychological components where they know they need to be focused and getting pumped up before competition and all that.
Yeah.
But neurologically speaking, how the brain is learning movements is something that's often just ignored. I think people understand that it's really important, but they're not talking about how to optimize it.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess again, broadly speaking, that's where we see Halo fitting into this big picture of building an athlete is through the neurological aspect of the brain.
Yeah, it seems like it's impossible for us to think that we can do anything without getting our brain involved in the whole process.
Right.
Last question here, is there a specific athlete or range of experience level that you think the Halo sport is better for? So if someone's listening or watching this and they've been doing CrossFit or some sort of sport for a couple of months or versus a few years versus are they, intermediate, advanced, does that matter at all? Or who are you targeting?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I get it all the time. I think there's kind of two different like areas here. Like one is that where we can really help people improve a lot quicker and a lot better is the amateur athletes, right?
Yeah.
So if people really care about like still improving and they have a lot of room to improve, we can help accelerate them very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's one area that we can help really quick, like very largely. The other side of it is that elite athletes probably care more about their movements, right? Like they're doing this for their profession. So even though they have a smaller gap, closing that gap between where they are and their athletic potential is much more important to them. Yep. So I think you can kind of look at it in both ways. Both your average person and your elite person would definitely see benefits.
Sure. And I said one more question, but something else just popped into my head here. Yeah. What's the age? Like, is there 18 and over, or like, has it been tested on younger populations? Because you mentioned that, like, if you could get this to somebody who's, still developing or like in the novice stage, they're going to improve or get to that next step faster. But can it be used on the younger population?
Yeah. So it's 18 years and up. Okay. Reason being is just that there's not that much research being done under 18. It's starting to move in that direction slightly. So there's been a few studies this year that came out looking at 16-year-olds also seeing good results.
Okay.
Yeah, we would say 18 and up for Halo.
Okay.
I guess going one level deeper than that, though, like really what we're doing, you can think of it as like making your brain a little bit more childlike temporarily. Sure. You look like an 8-year-old's brain, and it is so plastic as it is. That's why kids can learn languages so quickly. They can learn movements even quickly. And people always say it gets so hard to pick up an instrument as you get older and learn new languages as you get older. And that's true. Your brain becomes less and less plastic.
Sure.
So really what we're doing is putting your brain into more of this sticky, childlike state for a temporary amount of time.
Very cool. I'm sold. I want to be a child and learn things really fast.
Yeah.
So how can people get their hands on a Halo Sport if they want to try this out?
Yeah, on our website has a lot more information too. So haloneuroscience.com. Read more about our studies there, see more about the athletes that we work with.
Very cool. Very cool. Danny, I've really enjoyed this. I think that it's definitely fun getting to learn from somebody like you that's way smarter than me on this subject. So thank you for sharing that with me and, indulging my silly questions and not knowing as much as you. But
yeah, no, it was great. I really enjoyed it. Thanks for having me.
Yep, I really appreciate it. And I hope that people go and check out the Halo Sport, because I've been using it. It's definitely something that I've been throwing into my training routine. And if you want to even hear more about it or ask me questions about how I've had results on it, definitely shoot me an email, joe@allaroundjoe.com. So Danny, again, thanks so much, and I will talk to you soon.
Thanks, Joe.
That was my interview with Danny Holzman of Halo Neurosciences. I hope you guys enjoyed that. Like I told you in the podcast and in the intro, I've been using it for about 4 weeks now and have seen some improvements already, hit some PRs that I haven't hit for a long time. So I do think the Halo Sport product is worth checking out. That being said, it is not the cheapest product out there. So if you're going to check it out, use the code AllAroundJoe to get yourself $250 off. And if you have any questions, always let me know. I'm happy to answer those questions for you. You can get to them on the comments of this video, or you can find the show notes at allaroundjoe.com/136. So if you want to pick yourself up a Halo Sport, you can do so and use the code AllAroundJoe to get yourself $250 off. And you can let me know if you have any comments. So I hope you guys enjoyed this podcast. The All Around Joe podcast, where we optimize your human performance from my personal experience as an athlete, coach, and all-around self-improvement junkie. I will see you on the next podcast.